Welcome back, everyone, to a snowy January morning. It's pretty chilly down here, but got the space heater kicking in. So it's a big day. As you can see, I've got the heel block glued on. And so today we're going to do the transition to the neck. And you can see that I've already gone ahead and block sanded the length of the neck with 80 grit. I've got my transition kind of tapering down really nicely towards the nut and the headstock. And I finished shaping the transition to the headstock there. But you'll see how I do, how I get these curve shapes with doing the heel transition anyway. So you'll see how I do that. And then of course, when I do the finer grits of sanding back on the headstock, get to see how I do that. When we're looking at sanding that transition, this is where I just hoard a variety of objects for doing this. You can pretty much grab anything that has a nice cylindrical shape, of course. You know, you can go with dowel of any diameters you want. PVC pipe, if you've got it laying around, scraps of PVC pipe work just great. Double stick tape, put your sandpaper on there. All the way down to anything you can find around the home. Bottles, so any kind of food containers, you know, as long as they're hard material, hard plastic or glass, all the way down to prescription bottles work really well. So anything that's, you know, I'm always looking at the diameter of all of our products around the home and putting aside anything that looks like it might be just right for that shape. And that brings us to a couple of danger points that are worth pointing out here. First one you're going to notice is you'll see I've got blocks clamped up right at the point where that neck is going to join the box. And that's to help me stop sanding any material beyond that join. Because of course I've left that amount of neck with just enough to fit the box tightly without, of course, any gaps. So whether you're doing a neck through body design, in this case, this is going to be a neck slot with a bolt-on neck. But however you're inserting that neck in, of course, you don't want to take out any more material here. So I always clamp in blocks on either side, and that's going to stop me from ruining that fit. The other big danger point, and anyone who's already done this is going to know, when you're sanding that transition, when you're blending that heel curve into the neck, there is a very, very, very high probability of sanding a dip into your neck. And that is a big pain. That changes the whole ballgame because now you're left to re-sand down that transition and get it smooth again, and it changes all the geometry of your neck, and you just don't want to do that. That's another reason I've left the neck so much thicker up near the heel block and away from my taper down the length of the neck, so that I have enough buffer here of material to sand and watch as I'm getting closer and closer to blending it with that taper. So you want to be really, really careful and always be paying attention to how you're sanding this transition. But to kind of help protect against that, there are a couple of things you can do. One is chalk up that area. And number one, of course, so you can see your progress as you're sanding, but also so that you can even draw a line, sort of a danger line that you don't want to cross. And if you see that you're starting to touch that line, you know to back off and get back on the right side here. Another thing you can do, and this helps a lot, is whatever you're using as a sanding block, don't put sandpaper on the entire diameter. Just do a quarter or half at most, leaving an edge. And of course, that way, when you're sanding, just make it a point to never turn past that edge. Always start and work back towards the heel. Of course, you're never going to be working toward the neck. You always want to work back away from that neck, but always use the edge line of that sandpaper, and you know that you're not going to be touching that nice transition that you've gotten there. All right, but still, there is that danger of getting the dip in, so you always need to just a few strokes, take a look. A few strokes, back away, take a look. It's worth doing it in small amounts and checking instead of trying to do one big go at it, and then it's too late. So that's where we're at. We're going to sand in and blend this curve transition up to the heel block here. Then of course we're going to come in and we're going to be sanding this way. So we have a lot of compound curves going on here. We've got a curve going this way. That's going to have to blend to a curve coming around this way. There might even be a little bit of curving this way, just to get this as smooth on all points as possible. Okay, so here the first thing I'm going to do is come in and try to sand only the heel block until I've got it nice and flush to the side of the neck here. So that way I know I'm not taking down any more material here. Of course, when I think I've got it flush, then I'm going to leave it to going up to the next grit, 120, 150, and then if I cross over the two, that's a fine. That's a good thing actually, because I'm going to want to be sanding all of this up higher, and then it's nice and consistent. So we're just going to come in here, being careful not to angle your block too much. Go gently. Again, small amounts, stopping and checking. And we're getting closer. It doesn't take much with 60 grit. Another reason you want to stay up high, of course, and this is the danger of sanding. Sanding should always be the last option or the last step, because if you have any irregularities, and this goes for any stage of your cutting, shaping, if you have any irregularities, either in the shape or when you're joining two pieces, sandpaper only perpetuates or continues and can even emphasize those irregularities. So it's always better to do your precise shaping and your precise cutting with cutting tools. You never want to rely on sandpaper as sort of a substitute for cutting or doing your basic shaping. And then that's why we use the microplane, the spoke shave before we ever get to sandpaper. Sandpaper is only for surfacing the wood, giving it a nice workable surface, and of course getting it up from rough to the final surface for finish preparation. Okay. And so of course with your finger, and also with a good light position. If you can position your light so that you're down and you can cast a shadow on any edge, that's a really good telltale right there of how well you're blending your surfaces. Okay. All right, nice. I cannot feel any seam. I don't see any shadow cast from the light above. And I think hopefully maybe in the camera you can even see that right back here on the flat, you can't tell. Once you've got this all shaped in, you're not going to be able to tell that seam from a grain line. So now we'll come back on this side, do that. Then we're going to start taking the corners off first. The idea being, of course, the more wood surface you have, the more effort you're going to have to put into sanding, and the more danger of sanding too far down and creating a dip. And that is the classic pitfall. So to avoid that, you want to minimize the surface area that you're sanding, right? So if you come in and start doing this curve, getting this corner down to a curve first, you're actually minimizing the amount of surface here to sand later. That means you're minimizing the amount of time you're going to have to spend there, and minimizing the risk of sanding in that dip. So always be mindful and think ahead. This is the number one biggest lesson I learned from Gordon Mayer, the founder of Maya Moe, and the master builder over there, who comes from an engineering background. Always think about the process from start to finish and anticipate. Build in every step before the next. Try to anticipate every problem that could come out of the next step and build in a safeguard before. Okay, so with the sides blended in to the rest of the neck here, now I'm ready to come in and going to shape this corner, at least rough shape it with these corners. And you might just be able to see I've penciled in a couple of guidelines to the curve I want to get to. Now to start that out, since you've got such a large amount of material in this corner here, before I start getting to sanding, I'll come in with a rasp again. So on your rasp, again, you've got a side with a more aggressive tooth for taking off a lot of material quickly, and then you've got a finer tooth for doing a little bit smoother work before sandpaper. Especially when you're using the rasp, you always want to work in toward the body of the piece, I think, whatever it is. I don't do a lot of woodworking beyond guitars, but it just makes sense. First of all, if you look at the shape or if you look at the direction, it's almost like scales on a fish. These all have a bevel in this way. So if you're drawing in, you're getting a smoother cut, even with the more aggressive tooth side. If you push out, obviously, if you look at the bevel, the direction of those blades, these teeth, if you push away, you're grabbing a whole bunch of grain and you're pushing it away from the piece. And you can see where we're going with that. You're just going to tear a whole chunk of wood right out of your piece. So it's always better to work from the outside in, I believe. And another good key point is notice that the edges are smooth. So there's a safe edge. That's really important to keep in mind for any surrounding areas when you're trying to shape. Always be mindful and keep that safe edge against the side where you don't want to remove material. And that's going to save you. See, I can do this all day long, almost all day long, and don't have to worry about taking any material away. So yeah, always being mindful of resting that safe edge, or at least having it facing areas you do not want to touch, and having the teeth only on areas that you do. So as you can probably see, this is going to give me a nice shape to get that corner out anyway. Then I'll come in with my round sanding blocks and finish that shape. So here we go. kind of the same principle as with the microplane. It's a good idea to try to start following or establishing a curved motion with your hand to establish a little bit of a curved profile around that corner, because it just sets you up with a nice template as you go through down to sanding blocks. At least then, if you get a just like a straight faced angle going, you're going to need to go back in and round off now those sort of little micro corners. But if you can immediately start with rounding, that's just going to save you that time and trouble later on down the road. Okay, so I'm just going to continue at this both sides till I get most of that corner knocked off. Then we'll get to sanding the actual curve in, and then we'll get down to the transition to the heel into the rest of the neck taper. Okay, so now I feel like I'm getting that the corner's gone. Now I'm getting to a point where I want to kind of refine that shape a little bit more and get it down to the curve that I've got drawn in here. So for that, I'm going to go over to the finer tooth. Now with this tooth is so low that I can go in both directions, take material off a little bit faster. There's not nearly the danger of grabbing grain and tearing it off. So again, just be mindful of keeping your smooth, safe edge right up against that transition so you don't dip down too far anywhere that you don't want to remove material. So I'm just going to keep working this time, kind of short back and forth strokes like this, and just keep working in the round. Every so often, clear material away, check my progress. And we're getting there. I'm getting a nice curve established around there. Now I know that this is going to go away, so if I am digging a little bit in here, it's not terrible, because that's going to get cleared out when I come in and transition this and come around to the side. But still, you don't want to overdo it. So I'll probably go up to about a 1/16 of an inch away or so from my guideline before I get to using one of my sanding blocks here. That way I don't have to spend a whole lot of time sanding. Okay, all right. Okay, I think at this point I'm going to stop there, because as I get closer to to that edge that I want, that's where I'm going to want that to drop off into the curve and transition to the rest of the neck. So I think I'm going to stop there. I don't want to go in too much deeper where I'm kind of creating too deep a corner to sand out to a curve, but that's exactly where I want to be. So let's get over on this side and do this one. Okay, so I've got the corners knocked off really nicely with the rasp, and now I want to get in here and transition that heel face into the neck. So that's where I'm going to come in with my round sanding blocks, and I'll be working around this way, but also this way, because of course I want to sand with the grain, not against it. But you have to remember we have grain going this way as well as this way. So the trick is sanding with the grain along the taper, then kind of switching over to sanding with the grain along the side. So here we go. So again, I'm watching my pencil line here. and always trying to work away from the neck toward the heel. I'd rather have the heel take the hit than the neck. So. Again, you want to be careful not to go too long, too much. Stop, clear the dust away, look at your progress. You can always take more off. It's real hard to put the wood back on. And again, having a light on a good angle to see any shadows is very, very helpful. You can really start to see the smoothness of a curve when the light really gradually falls into the shadow. If you have a sharp edge, like here you're going to see, you see an immediate transition between the light and the shadow. But here you want to look for that nice gradient, and that is a visual marker that you're getting a nice, smooth, curved surface there. Of course, I want to stay very careful to stay away from getting too deep into that transition. I don't want to make this any narrower than the point where it joins to the box. And you want to think about changing up your angle as you're sanding, kind of your angle of attack. Think of it as kind of varying up the radius, because again, you've got complex curves going on here. You've got like almost, I don't know, what, 180 degrees of curve going on here, so it's a tricky shape. Now you can see before, I think you saw before, I had chalked in a limit line, so I just want to reestablish that. So I don't want to go, a little bit closer in. I don't want to go beyond that point. So if I see that chalk go away, I know to come back in. Yeah, I'm very happy with this curve. I don't know if the camera picks it up, but we've got a really nice, smooth kind of gradient of the light falling off into the shadow here. Actually now I've got a little bit of an edge going here because of course I'm avoiding this face, but now I can start coming in here and taking that out because I'm very happy with what I've got going on the side. So I can start working into the middle. Just to show you how you can start getting rid of any kind of flat surfaces or edges. Okay, now I'm really close to the transition I want, and this taper coming up to the heel block and the curve that I want. I can feel just a little bit of a rise here. that I'm going to want to knock down. So the easiest thing to do there is just to kind of chalk it up and just chalk the high spots, and then to just hit those. And of course, draw my limit line just to make sure, to remind myself not to go past that. Because again, I'll knock high point down, but then I'll want to kind of, transition it again. And then the last bit of flat just before that heel block. And this again is where I'm talking about choosing your diameters carefully. So when you're looking at the height of the heel block, of course, you want to think about the diameter that's going to give you the curve from the back of the neck to the front face of that. So, going with something too wide, of course, is not going to work, because you're going to hit the end of the heel and you're going to take material out of here, but because of the wide diameter, you're never going to get in there. So you want to pick something that kind of fits right in that curve already. And then you always want to work narrower. So you always want to work wide to narrow. So now I've grabbed a piece of dowel, much narrower, probably a 3/8 inch, half-inch, 3/8 inch piece of dowel. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to start working that flat, that little portion of flat there out. There's a temptation to want to just work that flat out this way, and you think that you're getting a nice curved shape by going this way, but that, again, that's the recipe for disaster of sanding a dip before this taper. So you're always better off working from the neck in this way. That way you know that you're transitioning the material always along that nice taper line into that curve, okay? So, and I'm going to push a little bit harder, put a little more downward pressure when I'm passing over that spot, because that's my high spot. But I'm always working in and hitting that heel block so that I know I'm digging into that flat. And then I'll start extending it out a little bit to that limit line, just like that, see? And now I can see that limit line disappearing. And that's all I want, just to have it disappear so that I know I've taken material from the taper right on up into the tight spot of that curve. And of course, I always want to think about rolling it off the sides this way as well, otherwise you're going to end up with a U shape. So a lot to think about, a lot to keep in mind as you're working away, and just kind of keep imagining the form that you want to end up with. Just kind of visualize what that finished neck is going to look like. And before you know it, you'll get to it. Take a look at our progress, get the dust off here. You can probably see that we've taken a little bit more of that flat out. So this is the most delicate part of the process right here. This is where you really want to go in increments. It's a game of inches. Down and just check and see. Got a really nice smooth taper going here. I can probably afford to ride it along a little bit more until I get that sliver out, but I want to be careful because, again, I do not want this to dip down lower than that angle. just to ensure that I don't, I'll start out a little bit ahead. Look. And I'm very happy with that. I think when we get into the 120, 150, that's going to smooth that out nicely. That's pretty much where I want it. Okay, so with a little bit wider diameter, I'm just going back in and smoothing out the transition where it rolls off to the side and kind of around the heel. So here I'm thinking about a radius kind of like this, almost like a windshield wiper motion, so that I know this turns into this. And I'm not really pushing at all. It's just the weight of the sanding block. And just make sure to keep rolling. And that's it right there. That's really nice. Yeah, no edges, no flat spots. Really, really nice curve all the way around to the back. There's just a little bit of slightly flat section here. I might even kind of extend a little bit. Because up here, I kind of like having that for the thumb. Here you want your hand to kind of wrap around, but as you come up and you're playing those tight frets, the narrow spacing, yeah, this is where I like having my thumb have a nice kind of flat surface. And that's it, right there. Okay, so I know we're picking up a real hot spot with the light here, but we'll move the light around and hopefully you'll see that nice kind of gradient of light to shadow as it goes around. First, we'll actually get the light out of the picture. Let the camera kind of correct itself a little bit. And go back in and just kind of look at So at this point, we're going to go down the length. So we'll hit all of those contours with the exact same sanding blocks of 150 to 220. Same thing going down the length of the neck to the headstock before applying our pour fill.
Ouch!